see everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for a great discussion and a look back from last year. Well, I just wanted to introduce myself as I'm chatting away. I'm Annie Bonetta, and I'm one of the board members for Green Apron Alliance, and I've been on the board, I think, for 6 months now. I just want to thank everyone for attending today's event. I don't know if you have attended any of our past events, but this is the 5th in our racial equity series. Please remember that Green Apron Alliance can only be powered by volunteers. So if anyone is interested in volunteering, please let us know. And also, please remember to pay your dues, and any donations that you'd like to make are welcome, as they help cover people who have fallen on hard times and can't pay dues, but want to be members as well. So we just want to welcome everyone, and I want to introduce you to Lisa Smith, a fellow board member, and she will be moderating today's discussion.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am so delighted that you will be joining us today for, as Annie described it, as our 5th racial equity conversation. It's been a year since we started this journey as a Green Apron Alliance to really create space and a safe space for ongoing conversation and dialogue, for us to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, for us to continue to stretch and grow in this space together as a community. And so I really just wanted to underscore that these webinars, these forums are really a place where you can be yourself, you can relax, you can be, you can ask the question you've always wanted to ask, and our panel will try and answer as best as we can. But this really truly is a safe space for us to have sometimes very difficult conversations. And so I welcome you to be a part of that. Before I dive in, just wanted to introduce our distinguished alum panel. I am always grateful to have them come back and join us. They have been a delight. They have unpacked some things over the last few sessions that we've had with them, and I'm really, really confident that they will do that yet again. And so first, let me start by introducing James. Welcome, James. He is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Alaska Airlines. Welcome, James, to the panel. Next, we have Amy Masterson. Amy is COO of Little Beats. Welcome, Amy. Next, we have Katherine Cheng. Katherine is Head of Global and Community Impact at Expedia Group. Welcome, Katherine. Yay, always delighted to have you. And then we have Sherri Jefferson, who is Chief Cookie Consultant. I love to say that name, Chief Cookie Consultant at So Vegan Good. So welcome again to all of our panelists. Thank you for joining us. For those who are here, we're going to kick us off with a little check your challenge, little game that we've played before. And I say play because, you get to put your fingers up and respond to some things. So what I'm going to have you do, and I invite our panelists to participate as well, is to put 10 fingers up, and I'm going to read you 10 things. And if your answer is yes, you're going to put a finger down. Okay, so that's how we're going to go. So 10 fingers are up. I see all of you guys. And then, so put a finger down if in the last year you have participated in a discussion about race. Put a finger down if you have initiated a conversation about race. Put a finger down if you have learned something new about race. Put a finger down if you have done some homework on the history of racism. Put a finger down if you've used your voice to interrupt something you thought was offensive. Ooh, that's a tough one. Put a finger down if you responded to something you thought was offensive on social media. Ooh, that's a tough one too. Put a finger down if you've talked to your children, young people, about racism. Put a finger down if you've changed a behavior to demonstrate that you're an ally. Put a finger down if you've leaned into an uncomfortable conversation about race. And put a finger down if you're committed to your racial equity journey. All right. Some of us have 2 fists up, some of us still have fingers up, and that's all okay. We are all on different parts of this journey called racial equity. And so for those who still have our finger up, and even if you had all fingers down, it's really an opportunity for us to continue to lean in. As Dolly Chugg said a couple of sessions ago, give that extra 10% as we move through this journey, and continue to use your influence from where you are to continue to advance the conversation. And so that's really what this finger exercise is. It's really an opportunity for self-reflection, for us to continue on our own personal journey down this track called racial equity. So we're going to dive right in and ask some questions. I'm going to kick us off by asking a question of Sherri and James to start. And so what I'm going to ask is, over the past year, what progress have you seen or experienced in the fight for racial equity? And so I'll start with Sherri.
As we were talking yesterday, I was thinking about this in terms of this is the best of times and the worst of times. So a lot of things have occurred that have made me cautiously optimistic, especially with respect to sort of the heightened awareness and acknowledgement around systemic racism in I'd say the majority of American institutions. Some of it is unconscious behavior, some of it is willful behavior, willful ignorance. But the fact that we're actually looking at these things, these institutions are looking at these things and trying to find ways to address it, to mitigate the effects of historical racism and inequity. So for example, I am an educator at the Getty Museum, which is a rich white institution full of European art. And the Getty has in their collection works of art that either feature people of color or by people of color, but they're not on display. And the few that are on display are in places where people don't necessarily see them. They're not in pride of place. So the Getty, it has put together a committee, a D&I committee, and we're looking at those issues. And when I say we, even though I'm a volunteer there, I have had a very integral part. I'm an integral part of those efforts, and they're really necessary. We had a situation where we're all doing these educational programs, and I put them on, but I've also attended them. There was one that was about racism in the ancient world. And the presenters, who were extremely, I think their hearts were in the right place. But again, this comes from not a pejorative ignorance. I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but just uninformed and uneducated. So they start talking about racism in the slavery in the ancient world. And they said, well, they were really like members of the family, because we're talking about how they were buried. And I said, I'm sorry, I've got to raise my hand. You don't enslave members of your family. You don't rape and maim and disfigure members of your family unless you're a psychopath. So let's stop talking about enslavement of people as a benign practice, as a benign institution. It's evil and it's insidious. I don't care if they treated this person well enough to kill them and bury them with them because they had this, pride, place in the household where they were sort of slightly exalted, but they're still enslaved people who are not free. So, we have to have those conversations. If we don't, then no one's going to start thinking in the ways they need to think about if we're going to address and mitigate institutional racism. That goes to critical race theory, and people there are legislatures in states that are outlawing the teaching of critical race theory. Well, then you're going to continue to have people who talk about slavery as a benign institution. So that's sort of the best of times, where we're actually having these conversations, we're actually addressing these issues. The worst of times to me is when you still see rampant police brutality and the murder of people of color with impunity. So yes, we had Derek Chauvin, but then there are a number of other cases where they're murdering Black and brown people, and their charges aren't even brought, let alone them being acquitted of charges that are brought. They're being let out on bail, they're not being charged. So that is sort of the worst of times. In addition to all of these efforts to suppress people's right to vote, from, as Obama would say, silly season, where they're outlawing you bringing water and food to people who are standing in this really long lines, and the lines are long because they've cut out early voting. They've reduced the number of polling places. And so all of these insidious efforts are putting our democracy at risk. And so that is, to me, the worst of times, or evidence that we have a lot of work to do. But what we need to do is not be silent. Just like I had to, take a deep breath and tell that girl, that woman, that this is not a benign institution. And I'm not attacking her, I'm educating her, but we can't sit by and not educate people. We can't sit by and not take action. We need to donate to organizations and people who are going to continue to protect our democracy. You don't have to vote the way I'm going to vote. That's fine, just so long as you acknowledge that we all have the right to vote.
Thank you for that. You covered a lot there, Sherri. That's a lot to unpack. I'm going to revisit some of those themes that you brought up around the benign practice. I think that's really, really, really interesting. And then kind of the uptick of police brutality that we've seen post the trial. And of course, the voter suppression tactics that are well underway. So James, let me ask that same question of you. What progress have you seen or experienced over the past year in the fight for racial equity? You can span the gamut, like Sherri did, the good and the bad and everything in between. So however you want to tackle that.
Yeah, I think, the thing I would say that I feel like has progressed probably more so over where it's been, but I also say this with the understanding that there's so much more that we can do, is this conversation around equity. And so, when I think about specifically the work that I do in DEI, before it was all about D&I or I&D or however you shape the letters. But I think that increasingly that equity has become more important, and that recognition that, we aren't all starting from the same place, and we aren't all starting with the same advantages. And Sherri, you talked a little bit about this, when you talked about just like police brutality. And there's always this argument that, for Black and brown people, if you pull your shoes up and work hard, you can be here too. Or, white people get arrested or are in prison as well. But when you look at the equity, when you look at the disproportionate impact as it relates to people of color, Black and brown people, the facts and the numbers show that it's not equitable and it's not the same. And so, I think that the progress that I've seen is that, and if I'm thinking specifically about just the business, entity, is that companies more and more are looking at, equity and what is specifically needed by different communities and different groups to ensure that we're all able to start at the same place and have the best opportunity to reach the finish line or the goal line. And just because there's equality or just because it's happening to other groups doesn't mean there's equity and not a disparate impact. And so I say that again, that there's been improvement, but there's so much more work that can be done around that. But I'm pleased to see that there's this increased recognition around the topic and subject around equity.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting when we look at equity and the disparity piece, I really want to kind of dig into that as we move through the conversation, because I don't believe that even in my purview, there's been a lot of conversation right now about equity. It's like the spectrum. We don't kind of dabble in that piece so much. So thank you for bringing that up. Before I jump to the next question, any one of our other panelists want to add to that? If not, I can jump into the next question that I have. In this time, I'm going to start with Katherine and Amy for this question. Again, over the past year, what setbacks have you seen or experienced in the fight for equity? I know that Sherri touched on kind of the setback piece, and so you can underscore that, surface some additional ones, but would definitely want your thoughts around what setbacks you have seen, and more importantly, that you have experienced, you have witnessed over the last year. Katherine, you can.
So I think that it's really important to celebrate the wins, and but to remind ourselves that these are instances, and the wins. There are so many more wins that we need to have to actually make any real systemic change. So really excited that Juneteenth has been made a federal holiday. However, we cannot take our eyes off the goal of voting rights and access to equal education, equitable education. Systemic racism doesn't just go away because we now have a federal holiday to celebrate the emancipation of slavery, right? Like and then housing and economics. I mean, there's a real, I don't want to be sort of the negative Nelly here, but there is a lot of there are so many systemic things that have made it impossible for people of color, specifically Black people, to advance in economics. I mean, in housing, education, economics, the things that we, I don't know that we could possibly fix it, but we have to be able to move forward and put laws in place and provide different avenues to rectify things that have happened in the past. So I think a lot of people are now sort of woke, right? That's sort of the big thing. But we want to be allies, but at the same time, we don't want to have this. We don't want there are just as many people who are so tired of being guilted. Like, it wasn't me that did this, so why should I have to do that? And we have to really, I think that's a real problem. And so the setbacks that I see are really more along those lines of like, we're making some progress, and people do understand that there is a necessary, we have these necessary tools that we have to use in terms of legislation and education access, but so many people are going to push against that and use it as an opportunity to push down even more. I mean, oppression is something that just keeps on coming on top, right? It's layered, and you have to unpack those layers in order to even start to make any type of reparations. I'm not even talking about the reparations that are so obvious, but even the things, again, that are so systemic and historic that it's so deep seated now. But also, again, though, I also think that what is a little bit scary about the times that we're in is that there is this a quick reaction from a lot of people. Also, like, if you look at cases of past bad behavior by people, blackface. I specifically will call out Governor Northam from Virginia, who had admitted to having blackface in a photo when he was in college, and the call for him to resign. And then the next layer down was the lieutenant governor also had something with sexual harassment, and then the Secretary of State was also blackface, had done something with blackface. And it was like, okay, we need to step back, and I'm not excusing any behavior, but we're so quick to take out people, and actually, there's a really good New York Times, The Daily Show, that was on today, actually, about what he's been able to do to make changes. I mean, he repealed the death penalty. I mean, that's huge, especially for people of color, right? I mean, things like that, we need to make sure that we're not just being so reactive and not allowing people to learn and be repentant for their mistakes and make changes that are meaningful. Because let's be honest, the people who are still in power are overwhelmingly white. And if we take out the people who we can help to sort of change the way that they think and help move things forward, we're not going to be doing any justice to anyone. But again, not excusing behavior. I think that's the real key issue here, is that things were different in the past, and we are trying to change that. So not excusing the behavior, but giving people the chance to learn and to make up for mistakes of the past, while making room for actually good policy and discussions, because I think that too many times, one of the downfalls I see of all of this is that people are afraid to have conversations. They're afraid to be open and honest because they're afraid of saying the wrong things. They're afraid of being called a racist when perhaps it's just ignorance. And I think that racism is really when you know that when the ignorance is there and you're not willing to change. And so we have to be a little bit more, I think, open and just really push education. I mean, I know that people are in fatigue with all of this, but it's not okay. I mean, people who live it every day, imagine their fatigue, right? So I think that we have to do it in a way, though, where we bring people along and can really allow for how they can make changes to their own way of thinking, but really policy, but education is at the core. So I think, again, let's celebrate the wins that we have, but not take our eye off the ball of the goal of making policy changes that can really impact economics in particular. I think economics is at the core of all this injustice. That's sort of the downfall.
Super insightful, Katherine. Thank you for that. I'm all about celebrating the wins as well. But you touch on so many disparities, and the equity piece that James kind of surfaced here seems to be kind of that thread as well. Amy, what say you on this? What advances or setbacks have you seen in the last year from where you sit?
Yeah, I think it's certainly been an interesting year, and Katherine, Sherri, and James all covered a lot of the things that I think I've engaged with and talked about and experienced throughout the year. I think I'm looking at the question through a little bit different lens, and that's through the lens of as the leader of a company that has really tried to implement and act on and sustain an anti-racism action plan that has engaged, our team and helped us all become better leaders and better humans and make change within our company. And I think we've made some decent progress on that, but I had a really challenging conversation with one of my general managers that I really respect last week, when she actually reached out and asked if we could have a conversation, which is good. And I thought it was a very different conversation than what I thought it would be. She actually challenged me and said that we didn't do what we set out to do this year with our plan. And so, I think I've spent a lot of time thinking about where we've had the setbacks and where we weren't able to achieve what we were able to achieve. And I think for her perspective is that it's not so much the actions that we did or didn't take within the company. It's that we didn't face outward and have a louder voice as, an established New York company. Yes, we're small, but we are an established New York brand and people know who we are. And we didn't take a stand to the community. We simply took actions faced inward to ourselves and said, we're going to make all of us and our place of work better. We're going to start educating. We're going to start learning. We're going to be better people. And she challenged me and she said, we've really missed the mark. You could have stood up loudly and used your voice in a number of different forums that with business leaders within the city. And, why didn't Little Beat, step in and push when there were issues with vaccine supply in some of the more underserved communities and in the other boroughs outside of Manhattan? Why didn't you do that, Amy? I know that you believe in that. And I think, I've thought a lot about it. And I think this is the challenge that I am always going to face, is that, and several of you have said this already, the drive for change and the need for education to support that change never ends. And so in the midst of the year of running a business, keeping a business afloat, trying to make things better for people, there were natural things that I just let go and that I didn't follow through on. And that because I felt like, I can't do that. I don't have another minute to handle that. And I think that setback personally and within our company, and that sort of setback or not moving in the right direction through the eyes of my team is going to challenge us to think about our plan for this next year differently. And I said, so that's maybe the positive piece that comes out of it. We're building the plan right now. We're building it around things that we're going to achieve internally, and then a couple of commitments that we know we can achieve externally. And so hopefully we'll begin to make a different impact and a better impact and more impact this next year.
Thank you for sharing that. Especially as a COO, I would love to hear from Katherine and James as well around the topic of corporate responsibility in this space. I know that so many brands have come out in support and advocacy for racial equity, whether in public statements or their marketing, what so have you. But for some of us, it is the rubber meets the road in how it's really handled internally, and how are brown people, Black people, underrepresented groups really having voice and platform to advance or to speak their truth, or to hold companies accountable for what they say publicly. I would love to, have Katherine or James kind of lean into that. What has been your observation, not necessarily particular to your company, happy to go there, but what are you seeing across kind of the brand corporate landscape as it relates to advancing the conversation of racial equity, both in their brand positioning and how they're actually building that authenticity internally? Whoever wants to take it first.
Yeah, I think, it's an evolving conversation, Lisa. I think, racial equity, again, you brought up a really great point, Amy, when you talked about what does it mean to be actively anti-racist. And I think companies are struggling with that. I mean, being non-racist and being actively anti-racist are two different things, and you have to intentionally be working to be an anti-racist company. I think that there are a lot of companies, and I think this was particularly true after, last summer with everything with George Floyd. You had a lot of companies that jumped on the bandwagon and they put out all these statements and they said, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. But I guarantee if you were to go to their policies and their programs and look at like what work they've done systemically, not much has changed. And so I think the challenge is how to make sure it's just not words on a piece of paper, but it's actually words that you live each and every day. And if I were in your company or organization, I feel this, I believe this, I see it in action every day. I can speak personally for Alaska. We're on a journey. We're certainly not there. But we've really taken a stance on actively being anti-racist. And it means, challenging ourselves every day to make the difficult and challenging decision. And there have been a couple of times when I've had to say, we can't just say that we want to do this and be inclusive and represent this. We actually have to do it. And this is what it looks like. And so while this may be unpopular, or while this may not feel like something that everybody's ready to jump on board with, this is what it looks like. So I think it's an evolving conversation, but it's a new conversation. Like I said, to my point about just equity, it's a new conversation that companies are having to learn what it looks like and how to execute it.
I agree. I think that companies don't really know what they're doing because they've never had to really be held accountable for this. And after last year, so many of them committed dollars to different organizations that were very well known, which is great for those organizations. But what did it mean to their business? If you're not tying what you're doing, both from a financial standpoint in terms of giving, as well as policy to your business, there's such a disconnect that it becomes a one-off. And I think that that's what it tends to be. But in addition, I think that with employees, you can say that as a company, you strive to be anti-racist, but guess what? Companies are made up of people, and people are flawed. People are who they are. They grow up with certain prejudices. Everybody has prejudices. I don't think anybody can say that there's one person who does not have a prejudice or a bias of some way of thinking because of how they grew up, where they grew up, whatever their experiences. But for companies to make declarative statements that we are anti-racist and we have no tolerance, they kind of can't do that because, again, it's made up of people and people are flawed. So I think that if companies could be honest and say, we're not perfect and we are on this journey, but we will do what we can to try and make, because, I don't think that policies within change in terms of they might put some numbers up, but I think we know what quotas mean. They don't really mean a whole lot there. It sort of backfires, but you really have to put in the work and the investment and the resources to provide a way for people to move into roles and to become the leaders. There's too many times when I think that we've seen that people will say, well, these people are not quite ready yet, and we want to train them. Well, they're, who's ever ready? You put them in and you let them lead and show that they can be ready, right? So I think it's a mind shift. And then if you look at, so many companies bring on consultants and they hire from the big consulting firms, the McKinseys, and guess who are most of the people that are there? They're the people who have had access to these very high quality educations. And if you really go deep down, if you break that down, it's such a racist proposition, because the people who have access to education at that level to be able to get into those roles and then get into companies to become leadership, it's so flawed. So I think that until you break down that whole system, there's just no way that companies can definitively say that we are making a difference and that we're moving things forward. They have to show it by actually investing in education at the very, very basic level, from preschool up, and even beyond that. It's, again, housing, education, all of these things play into that. They all have roots that actually help that system grow. So not to beat a dead horse, but it's the systemic piece here. You have to help acknowledge that and figure out how you can break that system down.
And Lisa, real quick, I'll say too, I think people are getting a lot more savvy to recognizing that. I think prior to George Floyd and last summer, companies could get away with doing a lot of that performative stuff and saying this and giving money here, and that was enough. But I think now people are a lot more savvy to call it BS when they see it, and to ask those deeper questions about what are you actually doing, and show me, versus just tell me.
Thank you for that, Sherri. And you wanted to jump in on this question as well.
Yeah, so going back to what Katherine said about we need to celebrate the wins, I am heartened by the fact that these conversations are occurring, that institutions are creating these programs and these safe spaces to explore these issues. But this is nothing new, right? Racism has been around since time immemorial. So it's not that they don't know that they exist, but at least they're confronting the fact that this exists within their institutions. They're creating these programs and these safe spaces to have these conversations. But we don't, and they don't, and society doesn't have the luxury of fatigue. We've been talking about this for a year, we're all done. Well, I've been Black for 55 years. So you've had this conversation for a year, and it's the only time I'm going to tell you my age. You've been having this conversation for a year and a half. We've been dealing with these issues since time immemorial, and I've been dealing with them my whole life. So this is my lived experience. And they're having these conversations. I want to see measurable outcomes. And I know that you can't right the ship in a day, a month, or week, but I want to know you to acknowledge this is a marathon, not a sprint. You just don't talk the talk, donate a little money and oof, we're done. That's not how this works. I can talk about the Getty. This is the richest museum in the world. And the ship is huge. And to right that ship and turn it in the right direction is going to take time. But we can take measurable steps to get to those outcomes, those favorable outcomes. But we have to be patient. We have to be focused. We have to be determined. And we can't just say this is what we're going to do. We have to actually do it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The measurable outcomes is super kind of important to me, kind of as I'm hearing all of this conversation. I want to kind of circle back a little bit. We are having this conversation because it's 1 year to Juneteenth, right? And Katherine mentioned it. Yes, we have a holiday, but I don't recall us asking for one. So, I'm going to put it out there that oftentimes these things are thrown at the Black community as but no, you're not really addressing the issue of voting rights, those things. You're throwing us a bone, hoping that this will satiate us for like a hot minute. and this is my perspective. I would love to gain this perspective of our panel. Is Juneteenth holiday something that we asked for and I missed the memo? And what does it really mean? Like, what does it really mean to have this as a holiday?
That is
Sherri,
a really good question. I don't know how to answer that because no, I don't recall us asking for it. But it seems like, look at the shiny object over here. So you don't pay attention to the things that are going on over here. You know, we haven't, passed voting right protections. You know, there's so many things that have not yet been done. There's not a comprehensive bill dealing with gun violence. There's not a comprehensive, bill dealing with some of these other issues, voting, like I said, voting rights, gun violence. So it's like, look at the shiny object over here. So while we're all looking over here, we don't notice that nothing is happening over here or not to our satisfaction. So I think it's nice, but there are so many other things that need to be addressed. There's so much more legislation that needs to be passed. And not to mention holding the prior administration accountable for the abuses that they engaged in while in office. So there's a whole lot that needs to be done. It's a nice to have. I didn't need it. Thank you, though. But let's really start working on these things that are going to impact us. Because I said before, and Katherine alluded to this before, our democracy is at risk. So I'd rather have they can take back that day if they take measures that will protect our democracy, because the damage that's been done cannot be undone in one generation. But, at least if we're working on these things, we're acknowledging them, we're talking about them, and then we're doing something about it. We need to do better and be better.
I would echo that. I like Sherri, I don't recall asking for an additional holiday, but I love a holiday just like anybody else. But I will gladly give that holiday back if I can drive in my car and get stopped by the police and not feel like I'm going to potentially die that day. If I can have equity in education and I can have access to roles and positions and jobs and compensation and things like my white counterparts. And be seen as an equal in the work that I'm doing. I think that to Sherri's point, it's like that shiny thing where it's like, look over here, look at what we did for you. But there's still so much stuff that is being perpetuated every day that continues to oppress Black and brown people and underrepresented groups every single day. And so I'd gladly give my holiday back if it meant that I could have just a fraction of those things that we don't currently have.
I also think that with holidays, so many people, a majority of people will see it as a holiday. Right. And it's a day of reflection. It's a day of understanding and education. And what would have been great is that if it's a day off from work, but you're forced to have 8 hours of education of the past and and how it's played out into the day, into present day, because having a holiday, that's what they've called it. And yes, it's a celebration of the emancipation from slavery, but the meaning today, it has to be relevant to today. And I think that the education piece, because so many people still have no clue or don't even want to know or acknowledge a lot of the injustices. I mean, again, layer upon layer of not just Black people, but people of color. And so when we talk about, celebrations or whatever, it's really about, it's about acknowledgement and education. Because a celebration to me, from a person of color's perspective, is when people actually acknowledge that these things have happened and that they have a very layered, the effects of it have been for generations, and it's and what we see today. I mean, if you look at the disparity in income and wealth generation, and the ability to live your life, and as the Constitution states, right? A holiday doesn't do anything to rectify that if you're not providing information and education.
And it's an issue of you give it, then you take it away. So you give us Juneteenth, but you're banning the teaching of critical race theory in schools. So yeah, they have a holiday, but they don't even know the meaning of it. So
Mhm.
it feels like it's a way of appeasing people, but not really changing anything substantial. You're not making really a big difference in people's lives. Get a day
And
off, they don't even
I'm,
know
su-
why.
I'm sure there are a lot of people too that would argue that, the slavery of today looks different than it did back then. It's still keeping Black and brown people down and marginalizing them. And to your point, Catherine, keeping people out of positions where they can make decisions around the government and politics, and, as CEOs and executives of companies where, that power and influence to make change comes. So, there's a lot of people, I think, that would just argue that while it's not exactly the same, it looks different, but it's still a form of slavery, even to this day.
Amy?
Yeah, I mean, I of course, defer to Sherri and James and Catherine, but I absolutely agree. I think from what I've learned this year, and I will be honest, I did not know about Juneteenth until I joined this company, and everything, blew up a year ago. And so I had some real learning to do about Juneteenth. And I think when I saw the announcement that that it had been made a holiday, the first thing I thought is that it was a movement to appease, and it was pretty performative, depending on what it depends on what's going to follow it. But there are so many things that need to happen to really, for this country to be actively combat racism and make change for what has happened over the years, that putting this out there right now seems like an empty action.
Thank you for shedding light. I know personally that if I were looking for holiday, I'd look for holidays so we can all vote. Like, give us that, right? I would love that. And to that point, I think each of us have talked about voting as kind of the number one thing, at least in my mind. It's like the number one thing. And even though the voter suppression tactics is directly, at least it seems directly towards Black and brown people, it really affects everyone, because as soon as you start to again take away the rights of a few, the rights of many are soon to follow. And so I was wondering, as we started the conversation around the role of corporate America, we kind of talked about kind of what's happening internally. Is there more that corporations could and should be doing to advance or heighten the discourse around voter participation across the board? Like, I don't know if I'm asking that question right, but is there more that corporations could be doing? Could their voice be louder? Could there be more advocacy at the corporate level, the brand level, that could help advance this? So we actually get a holiday out of this, and everyone can go vote and not have to worry about getting the water or the pizza or the what have you. That they're trying to do now. So you guys are all off mute. So whoever wants to jump in first can take that thought.
I would say yes. I would say yes, because corporations, I mean, they vote by where they place their the companies, right, and where they pay their taxes, all that. They have a big influence, and I recognize it's sort of like with lobbying. Corporations are very careful; they want to play both sides. But when you talk about voting rights, as you said, it does impact everybody, because the fact that we in Washington State have mail-in ballots. Can you imagine if they took that away from us now because they were trying to block certain populations from voting? Everybody would have a conniption, I think, because the convenience of it and the ability to do it from wherever, right? Like there are certain conveniences that many people take for granted. And when you block a certain population you have to block everybody. You can't, I mean, obviously they're doing certain things to try and only block certain people, but corporations can actually, I think, I think I've seen a lot of corporations, our own included, that were supporting access to voting and education, voter education, and sponsoring different things like that. But I do think that they can do more, because corporations have so much power. They're the ones who are funding a lot of these PACs. They're the ones that are funding campaigns for people who are in elected office. So I think that, and as we've seen in some of the anti-gay bills, the bills that were happening in where was it? Was it Atlanta? No, gosh, I think it's where was it? Atlanta or North Carolina, the bathroom bills, things like that, where companies were saying we're not going to hold our conferences here. We're not going to do these things that we had. I mean, the basketball, the Final Four, right? Like all these things, they have power. They just have to be courageous enough to actually use it.
Well,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Amy.
I totally agree. And I think even a small company like mine, we have a responsibility to be more active in our community. You know, we exist essentially right now within Midtown Manhattan in New York. We're a very well recognized brand with a lot of the big, financial institutions that are here in Manhattan. And that this is part of what I've been talking about with the team. You know, we have to figure out a way that we can use our voice externally in ways that are meaningful, that we can get our voice to the right people, because there's broad corporate influence, and then there's the influence about just us getting in front of the right person at the right company here to help start impacting change. So, you know, I think that is the challenge, both as a human and as a business person, and small companies standing beside the big corporations as well. So,
yeah.
All I was going to say is, I think, Katherine, you hit it right on the head too, is that, there's power in this. And when companies and organizations, I mean, not just even companies, but I remember even in Georgia when, a lot of this voter suppression stuff was coming out, some of the big movie production companies were saying, we're not going to film in Georgia. We're going to pull that and film. I believe Will Smith was filming a film that he pulled out of Georgia, and I think they put it in Louisiana. The more companies and the more that companies and organizations can start to impact these areas in terms of money and resources and some of those things, it definitely creates a louder voice and pushing for change in a way that is harder sometimes for, the individual to do, or small groups of people to do. So.
Thank you. We just have a couple more minutes. And so what I want to do is give you each 60 seconds to answer this question. So brace yourselves. How has the experience of being on this panel been for you? This is our fourth together, the fifth in the series. We started off with influence from where you are. We, kind of continued that with the George Floyd. We did some other things. I would love to just get your thoughts on how has this experience of being on the panel been for you over the last year?
I can start. It's been really good for me because, this is a racially diverse, gender diverse, location, city diverse, industry diverse group. And so what's been really helpful for me is just to be able to see how the perspectives from each of you and how it's impacting your individual areas and organizations and where you work and kind of your perspective, your lived experience from where you live at, all of those things, and just helping me kind of, think about how I think about this work and having practiced it for 15 years, because I obviously have one perspective, but it's just one perspective out of many.
Amy?
Yeah, it's been an amazing year. I think it's been uncomfortable. It's been inspiring. It's been challenging. It's been, there were moments where I feel like I can't do enough, and it's helped me really sort of reset my thinking as a human being and as a leader, to hear all the different perspectives on the panel, to realize that where I thought I was a year ago was nowhere near where I needed to be, and that's still going to be ongoing in terms of education and learning. And it's just challenged me to do better and to challenge others to do better. And so it's a year of discussions that I won't forget. And even though I don't connect with the panelists a lot outside of these sessions, every time we do, I learn something new, and I'm inspired to do better again. So just thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Sherri?
It's been a great experience for me, because every time I participate in this, something that is said really resonates with me. And I feel really empowered to go out and try to make change in the areas, in the businesses, or whether I'm working with kids or in my business or at the Getty, or just regular conversations, I feel like I'm informed and empowered and motivated to not just sit idly by, because it's exhausting. Like I said, 55 years I've been Black and going through this, and it's exhausting. However, you can't stop. You have to try to be a change agent. And so it's empowered me to feel like I can be a change agent, and gotten ideas of how to do it and what to say and what the issues are. And so this sort of diverse group of people, diverse experiences, diverse approaches has been really educational and empowering for me.
Thank you, Sherri. And certainly certainly not least, Katherine.
I agree with everybody. I think that it's been nice to have sort of this safe space to be able to say what's on your mind. It does make me sort of not filter a little bit, but I'm very reactive and I get very passionate about what I talk about. And so I have to remember that, people are in different parts of their journey. And so it's been helpful for me because I can be very fiery and just sort of step back and think about how, not everybody is in the same place. And to reach people, you have to be, really looking at it from all different perspectives. So, for the audience sake, if we ever have a bigger audience, but understanding that people are here to learn, and hopefully we can provide from just our perspective, because we know it's just a few of us here, not, we don't represent every point of view, but hopefully it's a well-rounded one.
Thank you all. For me, it's been a delight, the journey. I want to thank Alex for pushing me over the cliff. She originally said, we want to do this. And I was like, no, not me. And she said, yes, it has to be you. And so this has certainly been a journey. I've learned a lot. I've mentioned before, I'm an immigrant. I'm a military brat. I'm a mom of 3. And so this journey for me has been life-changing. It definitely opens up more capacity for me to love in new ways that I didn't think were possible, right? Because you often have to love people that don't love you the same. And so this has really been a heart expanding process over the last year, and it will continue to do that. So thank you panelists for your time. I do hope that we will continue this. Alex is the puppet master behind the scenes, so I'm grateful for that. But as we come to a close, I want to welcome Ebony Johnson. She is new to Green Apron Alliance, and I would love for her to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa and team. Oh, gosh, it's, I will say this has been a wonderful session. And I want to start by thanking you, Lisa, for being the moderator, our audience for joining us. And this was just such a robust and meaningful conversation that's really needed. Our panelists, you all are wonderful. You brought so much insight. I call them nuggets. I picked up so many nuggets, and I've been a D&I professional for almost 20 years, and I'm still learning, right? And just getting it from different perspectives. And as I'm continuing on my journey to be a leader in this space, it was just great to see other leaders being vulnerable and telling us what they're learning and how they are trying to make impact in their organizations where they are. So thank you for that. A couple things that really stood out to me were around the enslavement piece, right? And just thinking about that from a historical perspective, what's happening with voter suppression, setbacks that we're still trying to fight around. Amy brought something really great to the table in terms of just how she's learning and how her leader, pushed her, some of that she's working with. I think that's just great to have a safe space to have these conversations and so many more things. Right. So again, thank you all for being here. We do have an enduring commitment in this space around racial equity. Saturday is Juneteenth. Please do your homework, be thoughtful, and celebrate. And remember, please, that we are powered by volunteer alumni. Pay your dues, please, please, please. Donate when you can. And also, this conversation was recorded and it will be available on our Green Apron Alliance network in the next 48 hours or so. And please tune in to the network for different emails and social media outlets for upcoming events. Thank you all again and have a great night.